nominated anyone in her place. So we will be in total 6 councillors today. Are there any declarations of interest from those present? I see none, so let us move on. So the first item today, which I believe Roger Martin online is going to be presenting, is the risk management update. I hope you can assume that the committee members have at the very least had a chance to run through it, so you don't need to repeat it in great detail. So Judith.
I have a very minor question about the table on page 10 under point 14. In the heading, there are 2 Q4s. I assume that one of those should be a Q2, quarter 2. It goes Q4, Q1, Q3, Q4 on the headings. Ah.
Who can answer the query?
Should there be a Q?
You want to know?
Should there be a Q2 somewhere?
I think I can answer the query, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Yes. So there was a 6-month gap in 2024 when there wasn't a report to the audit committee. And so the numbers don't follow on as you would expect them to if there hadn't been that gap.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was nice and simple explanation. Okay, would you like now just to introduce the main points from your very comprehensive report, and then we'll take questions from members. Thank you.
Yes, I will, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. The report asks the committee to do 3 things. Firstly, to note and approve the Council's revised risk management strategy and toolkit at Appendix 1. Secondly, to note that work is ongoing for the corporate risk register, with the results of this review being reported to the next meeting of the committee. And lastly, to note the current service risk register in Appendices 2 and 3. So just to very briefly touch on these items, the risk management strategy and toolkit was last reviewed in 2023. And this latest review has been completed under the direction of the Council's Risk Management Group, and the document that you have in front of you at Appendix 1 has been approved by the corporate leadership team. Key things that I think I would pull out of it for you are that on page 18 of the pack, it defines risk as those development or occurrences that, if they materialise, might jeopardise the achievements of the Council's stated priorities in its plan, the delivery of services in its business plans, and the delivery of its statutory duties. So in other words, in this way, the strategy and toolkit is aligned with the Council's overarching strategy and its priorities. It summarises the different roles and responsibilities on page 20 of the pack, and those include the role and responsibilities of the Audit and Governance Committee. It divides risk into different categories, and these are shown on page 24. It identifies the Council's risk appetite across these different risk categories, and they vary. And it defines what is meant by low, medium, and high. And these risk appetites, as outlined, have been considered and agreed by the corporate leadership team. It states that changes to the Council's risk appetite must be agreed by the corporate leadership team and by the Risk Management Group and by the Audit and Governance Committee. So you have oversight of that. As you would expect, it provides guidance on risk identification, risk description, and how to score risks. And it includes much more detailed impact criteria for each category of risk on page 34 of the pack. It also gives guidance as to when risks should be escalated on page 43. So those are the highlights of the strategy and toolkit I wanted to draw to your attention. Moving on briefly to the corporate risk register, a review is currently taking place to make sure that the correct risks have been identified and that they're properly described and scored. And the areas where the risks have been reviewed are shown in paragraph 11 of the report, and they cover areas such as financial sustainability, workforce sustainability, housing, health and safety, civil emergency response planning, service demand pressures, infrastructure and the needs of the city, cybersecurity and IT resilience, regulatory compliance, the political and partnership landscape, including devolution and local government reorganisation, governance compliance and climate change and mitigation and adaptation in a single risk. So with regards to this, the council's asked to note that the review is ongoing and to expect a report on the outcome at its next meeting. The final item is the service risk register, and the red risks are identified in paragraph 15. And that concludes my introduction to the report.
Thank you very much. That was nice and succinct but comprehensive. Do I have any questions from committee members? Simon Ottino.
I've got quite a few, so shall I do three?
Go on.
Okay. I mean, yeah, back to the table that Judith referred to on page 10. It sort of would be useful to know, for a bit more detail in that table, to know like where have the red risks come from? Are they new, or are they ones that are just seem to be, there's some that just seem to always be there? Is there movement from amber to red or green to amber, or whether there's a movement the other way around? So that would be useful to have that information available. Yeah, on page 32, when you've got your description of the different risks, I mean, I'm struggling to know what the event should occur and the event is likely to happen. How different is that, and how does an officer, they sound like the same thing to me, something that should occur and is likely to happen. How does an officer decide which of those it falls into? On page 34, under the reputation column, where you're talking about adverse publicity, you've got locally and regionally in mainstream media. I'm wondering what exactly you mean by regional mainstream media. And also, just because there's a tendency for journalists to, clickbait journalism, isn't it, to promote controversy at any excuse. So you almost, adverse publicity is like an incentive for the Oxford Mail or other media organisations. So I'm wondering if we need to look at that more carefully. Do you want to answer those ones, or shall I?
Yes. So starting off on the service risk registers, though the risks that are identified as red risks remain as red risks from the last report. The risk management group has asked for the service risk registers to be reviewed on a quarterly basis, and then another review is just about to go out, or I'm going to go to the services and say, another quarter has passed, I need you to update the service risk register. And so there might be some changes coming around about as a result of that, in which case that would be reported to yourselves at the next committee meeting. Then I think that on page 32, you wanted to know, looking at that table, which is the probability table, a score as 2 was that the event could occur, and a score of 3 is the event should occur. And I mean,
it was should and is likely to, which I can really understand the difference.
Okay. Thank you for reminding me of that. When you're looking at risk, it's quite. I would accept that it's hard to put. It's hard to assess probability, and it's probably more of an art than it is a science. I take your point about that language and whether that's too similar. I think I would probably point you, if I may, to the percentages probability of occurrence in the column just to the left, where should is 40 to 59%. The event is likely to happen is 60 to 79%. So I would hope that would give guidance to staff. I take your point about the language. Perhaps the word should isn't the right word, because thinking about it now, if something's 40%, does that mean it should occur, or is should something that's sort of more than 50%? So I'll take that point away, if I may, and consider that. You raised a point about reputation as well on the impact table, and you was asking the difference between locally and regional. Those terms aren't defined anywhere, but I would say that locally would be within the city of Oxford, and regional, well, that might be Thames Valley, though it isn't defined in the document. But I would see personally that as the difference between local, the city, region, Thames Valley.
All right, so when I go on to like page 47, which is that huge table of risks, I mean, I find it really hard to read, and I'm wondering whether it could be set out. I don't really understand how it's set out, whether what the order is, whether it could be set out more easily for us into sort of areas of the council. It just seems to be all over the place. So that's the first point, and then it just lots of it just doesn't look like it's been updated. And I mean, it says the risks have been loads of the risks have been added in 2011, and that sort of history is slightly worrying that they're still there. And in some of the risks, they talk about the risk of Brexit. I mean, that's quite a long time ago. I would have thought that the council, in its planning, is no longer sort of unsettled by something like Brexit. It just feels like they haven't been updated. And that makes me think that, we're actually reviewing all these things properly. And some of them are also not specific enough. It's sort of like one of the risks is about welfare reform. That's dated 2011. I mean, I think it should be about a specific issue of welfare reform rather than a sort of general thing, because otherwise it looks like it just stays there. And is anything actually done about it? Yeah. So people moving over to universal credit, maybe that might be the specific issue. I'm just sort of wondering whether we are looking at these carefully enough, or we're just letting them follow from one year to another. Also from 2012, there's the one about legal retention, and pay scales from 2011. Sort of, how comes we haven't sorted that? Are they just following on? There's one on page 48 about neighbourhood plans. That's been around quite a long time. Surely we're on top of that, and we understand what's going to happen. What these neighbourhood forums, for instance, are going to sort of issues they might come up. Why is that a risk? And there's a risk called opposition. Is that really a risk? I mean, it sounds like democracy to me. The pool cover, the insurance not covered. The insurance for the pool cover not covered since 2021. Why is that still on there? And then in terms of like the way they're set out, you've got risks like uncontrollable spread of diseases. I'm really wondering how much input the council can have over that, and then specific things like about the adult homes pathway, which we should be much more on top of. So yeah, I sort of a bit of an issue about the way this table's set out and whether it's reviewed or not. I think on page 49, there's another one that references Britain's exit from the EU. And then is page 51 to 58 just a repeat of that table, but in even tinier writing?
So pages, the one of the appendices just shows the risks, and then the second one shows risks and controls. So there's more information on the second one than the first.
Okay, I think Ros Smith wanted to ask some questions.
Sorry, no, Chair, and I apologise once again for being late. I stopped at all the red lights properly, like a cyclist should do. Yeah, when I read this report and looked through it, and I take Simon's points actually this evening, because I actually thought I was looking at a report from 2 years ago or 3 years ago, possibly. Please tell me I'm not.
No, so with regards to the service risks, those that are the service risks that are on the council service risk register at the moment, it was identified in the council's in the BDO internal audit report from January that the risk registers needed to be refreshed. We started with the corporate risk register, and I've explained that the process for that is ongoing, but the council service risk register needs an overhaul as well.
Nigel Kennedy's going to say something.
Yeah, I think some of the points you made are very salient, councillors. Actually, and I think certainly presentation we can look at that, Roger, in terms of perhaps when we next present the report. I think Roger's right. These are coming from service areas and service directors, basically. Risk management group, as has been said before, regularly reviews these, basically, and indeed most of those risks that you talk about. I wouldn't say Brexit. But most of the risks that you're talking about basically are still running risks that we have. I mean, for instance, there's one on there around treasury management, which is always featuring basically because it is a high risk to the council. We mitigate, but it's still a high risk basically. So a lot of those are still outstanding, say, and the risk management group do review these registers with these service directors basically, say, on a quarterly basis.
Ros, you want to come back?
Those two words, Nigel. Treasury management. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and what's happening today from overseas, from across the pond, is a big thing for treasury management for all councils at all levels. And that needs to be quite a high risk, needs to be read. It'll affect a wealthy city like Oxford City with very, very high employment and low unemployment, but high prices on our houses. So we have a lot of inequalities in certain parts of the city, but one thing that we have got is lots of job vacancies still. But what worries me with these reports coming from a certain White House across the pond is very worrying, I think, for all areas, but particularly for councils and particularly for the treasury management as well, Nigel, because we're looking at people's, our pension pots and all sorts of things being attacked. So it's not looking good. And I think it's definitely one that we need a very high up on the risk as a risk to the council.
Yeah, just to say, in answer to your query, it is high up on there actually, and it does feature on the financial services, my service plan on a regular basis. The risk is at its highest level. We are dealing with huge amounts of cash basically. That having been said, the procedures, the treasury management practices that we put in place and the controls, I believe, are sufficient to lower that risk. It doesn't lower the sort of the gross error, the implications if it happens, but it does lower the probability if you've got good controls in. And I think through the financial accounting team, we have those controls in place, but we are constantly alert, and it's features on my service plan, all the time.
If the risk register is being, constantly monitored and updated, I think Simon's quite right that we do need to see a more up-to-date one. Actually putting all that sort of information on a spreadsheet is actually quite difficult. So I have some sympathy and empathy with officers trying to put all that on the same line as such. So, you identify the risk, what's the probabilities, and also who's in charge of it and what area is it part of, and also what are the mitigations to alleviate that risk as well too. So it's again, it's a question of judgment, isn't it? So but I think it is difficult, and I have some empathy with the way it's laid out.
unless there are more questions, I was going to make two kind of generic comments. One is it's rather helpful to know which of the risks we think we can manage in some way and which are generic risks. Some of these are things I would suggest are not very much under our control. So there's some which are closer to home. But a more valuable, just a pragmatic point, when you're compiling these registers, there are many other councils, city counties, which are, I imagine they're all producing similar risk registers. Do we, when we do this, does the relevant committee in the council have some knowledge about how other councils view these risks? Because we often end up with a discussion about, well, I don't think this is such a big risk as something else. This is all a question of judgment and probability. At least I would be more reassured if I knew that this was in line with how similar authorities are viewing the risks that they face, let's say about climate change or something. I don't know if that's possible, and I don't know if this is something that we can do within the council or whether we have to turn someone like BDO, which has greater review of these things.
Yeah, back on that point, yes, I think councils along the south coast may be having different thoughts when it comes to risk of climate change and so forth and disasters, and those that live next to big rivers or that sort of thing, or even trying to defend fens and things from drying out. So I think there are different risks in different areas of the country. So it's very difficult to benchmark, I would have thought. Who do we normally benchmark, so we'll say for finances and things within the country? Which city would we go? Hopefully not Cambridge. It's a lot smaller.
I was going to say Cambridge actually, but
it's a lot smaller.
I'm just trying to recall my CIPFA groupings basically, because they are grouped on demographics.
Yeah.
Cambridge off the top of my head. Watford is another one basically. I can't recall. I'm looking at Mr. Lewis basically, who might be able to help me out, but those are a couple basically that I know are in our CIPFA groupings. Bill, I don't know if you know any others basically.
Bill, do you want to add to the list?
I'm afraid I can't, Chair. But I will look into it.
But I leave this as a question to be answered. And I take Ros's point that we know that some councils face, climate change may have been a bad example, but there are many risks there which I don't think are unique to Oxford. And it would be rather nice to know, if we are in line with the consensus among the others, because some of these I think will be discussed again when we come to this committee meeting, because we don't always agree with quite how the rankings are done. They're rather presented to us as a fait accompli. But if I don't see any more hands, could I? Oh, please. Okay, and then we've got a recommendation after this.
Oh, right,
Go on.
okay. So I was looking at the development of Fit for Future programme, gives the new accountability and responsibilities for leaders. And if not addressed, service improvements and efficiencies are not delivered. And I just sort of wondered why that was in italics as such, whether it was pulled out. It showed it to me that it was important. And I know in the past we've had discussions in this committee, Chair, with regard to staff turnover and staff retention and things. And is that part of it? Is that Fit for the Future programme I understood was part of trying to retain good quality staff within the council? So first question, why is it in italics? And is it being continued, or is the Fit for Future programme being continued?
Is that for you, Roger, or for Nigel to answer, or Bill?
As to why it's in italics, I don't have the answer to that question, actually. In terms of the Fit for the Future programme, basically, I mean, there is a continuation of that, actually, in terms of all that we do, actually. I think under the latest council objectives, it's something slightly different in terms of the wording, which I can't think off the top of my head. But the Fit for the Future programme is all about how your ICT, your people, your recruitment, and all that sort of stuff. And yes, that is an ongoing programme, and is reported to the council's internal organisational change board, which is chaired by Tom Hook, one of the assistant chief execs. So that is ongoing. Basically, it's an ongoing programme. There are savings off the back of that, basically, and I suspect that's some of the risks there, but also staffing retention, as you say, which we've already talked about in previous audit and governance committees, basically. But as to why it's in italics, I'm not sure, and I don't know where Roger does, but I don't know.
I would suspect it's a formatting issue. I think someone started off with a control I and they stuck with it for that particular section. I'm going to ask that we go, and we are asked first to note the outcome of the risk management strategy and toolkit, to note the review of the corporate risk register being undertaken by the corporate leadership team, and then maybe the only one about which we may not agree is to review the service risk register. Well, we've raised various questions about it. I suppose I would like, as a recommendation, to add some kind of comparative information about how other similar councils defined, however it can be defined, how they view these similar risks, because I suspect very few are specific to Oxford. I don't know if that can be done, and I'm not quite sure who would do it, but I think maybe as a committee it would be good to request that. Is that acceptable to the committee? I see lots of nods, so I take it as yes. So thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you, sir.
We now go on to Yasmin and Josie, who we haven't met before, I think, who are going to be presenting the BDO internal audit update report. And we have, on my sheet here, we have maybe 4 officers attending. We've got Neris, who I can see on the screen, Richard Wood I see on the screen, Tony Henderson I see there, and I'm not sure if, do I see Jane Winfield? She may be here, but I don't see her. So, anyhow, I think we have a good number of officers, so I'm going to ask, will it be you, please? Is it Yasmin introduced?
Yeah, it's myself, Chair.
Thank you. Steam ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to go through the order of the reports first before I go on to the progress report. So I'll go through agenda item 4, which is the progress report. That includes both the homelessness prevention report and then also the fire risk assessment review as well. I'm joined by Josie, who will go through the fire risk assessments review, and then I'll do homelessness prevention. Agenda item 5, I'm joined by my colleague Alex. He'll be going through the data protection report. This is presented in its entirety because it's a limited opinion on design. And then it'll be passed back to me to go through agenda items 6 and 7, which is a follow-up report and the draft internal audit plan.
Thank you. That's quite a lot to cover, but you'll kick off now, yes?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So going on to the progress report, Chair, we've made good progress on the 24-25 plan. We've completed homelessness, data protection, fire risk assessments, and we're at draft report stage for both the QL optimization review and affordable housing project management. Data analytics review, that is nearing completion as well. We just had a few hiccups in terms of extracting some of the reports for accounts payable. And then we have an income generation review, which is due to start in April. So we hope to bring all these reports to the July Audit Committee alongside the Head of Internal Audit opinion as well. Part of the progress report also talks about the internal audit plan. When I come on to agenda item 6, I can talk through it then. I'll pause for any questions before I proceed on to the homelessness prevention report.
I'm looking at the report. Yeah, about this one. Not the whole report, but this is item 4 at the moment. Because we are going to go on, for example, on homelessness prevention shortly. At least I think we are.
Yeah, we are, Chair, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, any questions on what Yasmin said so far? Okay, thank you very much. I mean, some of what is interesting is what's in your plan going forward, but maybe we can cover it then. So, fine. Thanks very much. I think what we're asked to do here is to discuss and note. Well, we haven't discussed much, but we've definitely noted the report. So please proceed with the next one, which is actually on the agenda. It's a data protection report. Are we doing that?
No, Chair. I'll go through homelessness prevention, just provide an overview on that, and then, we'll go on to fire risk assessments, if that's okay.
Okay, please.
Perfect, thank you. So in terms of homelessness prevention, this was a module on design and effectiveness. So we looked at the arrangements the council's got in place to support homelessness and secure accommodation in line with the Homelessness Reduction Act 2017. I'll take the report as read and I'll just go through some of the headline findings on this one. Finding 1 was around the housing benefits subsidy, which allows the council to recover 27% of their temporary accommodation costs. This has left the council in a £1.3 million deficit position overall, so I believe this is over 5 years. It has been factored into kind of the budget setting process and forecasting as well, so the council are well aware of this position. But we also found that there's 112k rental arrears, which are unlikely to be recovered. This was due to a number of factors. One was around the surge in the homelessness applications that were coming through, resource constraints within the housing team, and there isn't a seamless integration between the benefit system, Civica, and QL, which means housing benefit applications, although they were being made, some of the information wasn't available or not seamlessly going through to the Civica system. There was also a delay in entering some of the information onto the QL system. By the time the housing team were getting to putting these applications through, the individual was either moved onto another resident or they absconded, or the various reasons for why the individual wasn't residing in the accommodation that was provided to them, and hence they kind of lost out on claiming those benefits. Moving on to finding 2, this was around personal housing plans. So they're required to be completed for each individual that requires temporary accommodation. The council has a target of 21 days to complete these. There were significant delays in completing. A sample that we reviewed was a sample of 10. So 5 out of the 10 cases that we looked at, there were delays between 23 to 74 days, which is exceeding the council's target of the initial 21 days timeline. And finally, finding 3, there wasn't any contractual arrangements with hotel providers for temporary accommodation. The council relies on kind of a basic booking terms and informal agreements. So they do try and do negotiation on room rates through kind of blocked bookings. But again, better room rates might be able to be offered if there was an agreement in place. But I do understand now that there's a temporary accommodation framework that providers are required to tender against as part of a mini competition. And I guess the framework has kind of various service provisions that can be made once they have tendered for that process. I'll pause there for any questions. Thank you.
Maybe I should first allow the officers. I'm not sure if it's Neris and Richard, or which of you is going to be able to respond to these? I know we've got written versions here, but maybe one of you would like to summarise your response to these seemingly well-made criticisms.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Yasmin and her team, for all the work they've put into this report. Overall, we recognise the picture that's been painted and welcome the recommendations. I suppose the only thing we would just emphasise is that for the period that the report was considering, it was a period of high increase in demand and very much the council having to respond to a huge increase in homelessness over that period. Basically, we were faced with a large increase in demand, and then what we were having to do was move from a position of maybe having 5 to 10 people in a hotel accommodation back before homelessness increased significantly to a position where we probably had about 100 people in hotels. And as you could imagine, there was significant need to develop our procedures over that period. And that's really what the report is picking up there in terms of the relationship between the housing benefit and housing needs teams in that period, and why there was that then issues with information going backwards and forwards, which affected the ability to collect the housing benefit. I'm pleased that Yasmin and her team in her work, they recognise that where we are now is very different. We've completely overhauled the process between those two parts of the council, and we're no longer dependent on emails and conversations going backwards and forwards between officers. We instead have auto reporting, for example, in place where information goes back routinely, and that is now been significantly improving the process and the rate of collection with those rents. And then the other point, just in terms of the relationship between the housing benefit team and housing needs, those arrears that's been pointed out in the report, it really is just a fraction of that is caused by some of these process issues. I would just draw the panel's kind of attention to that. What we're doing in the hotel placements in terms of temporary accommodation at the moment is we have a lot of very vulnerable people. They can be placed at any time in the day, sometimes late at night. We have a legal duty to house them. They don't have to provide evidence of to allow for a housing benefit claim, and if they don't make that claim, there's very little legally we can do because of our statutory obligations to house them. And then often those stays are very short term, maybe a few weeks before we then move them on. So that just paints a bit of a picture why it's so difficult to collect housing benefit in that circumstance, and why collection rates would be lower than, say, in the general council housing stock. So there's some points just on that main first finding in terms of the housing benefit claims. On the personal housing plan feedback, again, we totally accept that. Again, it's linked to the significant increase in demand, and then as a kind of as officers, we had to respond to that. It was quite a difficult process as demand increased, and then we had to increase staffing and catch back up with that, increase training. And what we have now done is ensure that we've got staffing at the correct levels. We have checklists in place to make sure that officers are doing it in the acceptable period of time, replying to clients, and we now have closer oversight with management to make sure that those standards are being met. And then finally, on the procurement framework, I think Yasmin's basically already covered that. We accept that where we were before with small numbers of bookings, that we've had to evolve and change our procurement processes as we move to a longer term, much larger scale bookings. We have already moved to block bookings, but we're literally in the process of launching now, after cabinet approval last year, a new temporary accommodation procurement framework, which will basically answer the feedback given and ensure that we're fully compliant going forward. Hopefully that's added some context, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I just would ask, does Neris have anything to add?
I don't. Thank you, Councillor Fry. I think Richard's covered it comprehensively.
Okay, I will invite questions from committee. Ros?
You've mentioned that there's the spike in the number of claimants and things of homelessness. Do you know what caused the spike?
Yes. There isn't one reason for a large increase in homelessness within Oxford or in the country. Um, there's many factors, and it is very much a national trend. Most local authorities, certainly in the southeast of England, are reporting large increases in homelessness, and that is affecting us as a city council as well. Locally, it's a range of factors. We have a large number of evictions from the private rented sector, most likely due to very high rental inflation at the moment in Oxford. It's something like 9.4% ONS are reporting annually. So rapidly rising rents above benefit rates, that is leading to more evictions. We also have high numbers of friend and family evictions within Oxford. That we think is heavily linked to the fact that new households struggle to form within the city because of the ability for, say, adult children to move out and afford accommodation is very difficult. And we also have the additional pressure locally because of the Home Office hotel in the city. They've got housed hundreds of single adults there, and as their refugee asylum claims are processed, they then evict them once if positive, and then they present to us as homeless often. So that's added a major pressure in terms of single homelessness to us, and we often have to use hotel accommodation then to house them.
So thank you.
Simon.
Yeah, can you remind us how housing benefit is claimed? I know how housing costs are claimed for universal credit, but housing benefit is different. And what does the client have to do, and what does the council have to do? But you talk about having a lack of information to do it. What information exactly are you lacking generally? And given that, even if people are ringing in the middle of the night, you're doing some sort of assessment of them to establish whether they're in high enough need to get emergency accommodation. Why, in that assessment, can't you get all the information that might be needed, both for a housing benefit claim and for the two different systems that you have to enter the data on, and so that one person could enter it on both those systems? So yeah, I'm wondering whether at the point of referral, where you are doing an assessment, why you aren't able to get more of that, and exactly what does the council have to do, and what does the client have to do? I mean, is it the case that clients have got housing cost claims on their universal credit, and then therefore when you actually try and get the housing benefit, they refuse to pay you because they're paying it for somewhere else where they maybe used to live, or possibly it's a fraudulent claim? Or is it, I'm struggling to understand why you can't get that information from them.
I can answer for that. Chair, would you like me to come back in?
Please, well, please answer.
Thanks. So in terms of housing benefit and what we ask for the client, so when we put someone into a hotel accommodation, we can only, as Jasmine's pointed out, only cover a portion of that with housing benefit. So what we actually charge the client via a rent account that we set up is only what we can then claim back from housing benefit, and the rest is just a loss to the council immediately and doesn't show as rent arrears. That's shown in our temporary accommodation reports around costs to the council. In terms of then that bit that we do charge, that is eligible for housing benefit, a rent account set up broadly similar as you would a council tenant. And then, as the councillor points out, unlike with a general needs accommodation, which will be covered via the universal credit housing payments, because it's temporary accommodation, it goes to our housing benefit team for a housing benefit claim. In terms of that claim, we can't make that claim for them. They have the way the benefit system works is they have to consent to that and work with us on it's quite a basic form, but a basic form does need to be completed with them signing that to then make that claim, which is then the process that then follows. We send that out to the person. We ask them to complete it. Some people complete it, send it in, and it all goes fine. For those who don't complete it, we then have to chase them, and we do that in broadly two ways. We have our support officers who go out and chase people up for the applications and support them to fill them in. But equally, as you would imagine, we would then have our rent officers call them up and say, you need to make sure your rent's being paid and you need to claim housing benefit, and do you need any support for that? In terms of the calls at late at night or whenever and the assessments, the legal bar is very low in terms of if we have a reason to believe that you're in priority need and are homeless and are eligible, we have to accommodate you if you're homeless. So with very little information, we have to make that decision early on. And then what happens is as we accept a legal duty, in the weeks that follow, we then seek to truly establish, this is in line with case law, if we do then have an ongoing obligation to provide accommodation. As a result of that, the bar to accept if someone needs to go into accommodation is far lower than the bar for housing benefit, where I'm not a housing benefit professional, but they need lots of sources of information sent through to just confirm eligibility and income sources and capital and all those kind of things, I would imagine. But as I say, I don't work in that personally. So if someone rejects, one does not want to make a housing benefit claim and we place them into a hotel accommodation, that doesn't matter. We have a legal obligation as a council to provide that accommodation. So they can basically say to our faces often, well, not often, but they can in rare circumstances, I don't want to make a claim for housing benefit, or I'm not willing to provide that information. We still have our legal obligation to provide accommodation.
Obviously, there's like pressure on hotels in Oxford, particularly at some times of year, I imagine. Is a factor the fact that you're often having to place people simply miles away in other towns, and then struggling to get to them? Is that a factor? And does that mean sometimes you can't actually even check whether they're still using the hotel or not? Are you getting good information about whether people actually are taking up these placements or not? But I guess particularly if you offer something somewhere in Reading or somewhere miles, or Swindon or miles away, they may, I don't know,
do you have
be
an
less inclined
answer?
to use it.
As in a factor of not the collection, of having a lower collection rate. Sorry, I didn't quite follow that, the first bit of the question.
Yeah, I think so. That's my question.
Not that I'm aware of. Most of the time when we offer interim accommodation, people are accepting it. Where they're not accepting it, they very much tell us. And then, we go through either options of finding alternative accommodation if appropriate, or saying that's the only offer. And then if they don't take it, they will normally tell us that. The hotel providers, we have regular meetings with all the major hotel providers. We have very good relationships between our officers and those providers and the people on the ground running them, and they regularly share information to us. In one of our biggest hotels, we do have officers on the ground a few times a week. So again, they can normally spot if there is people are leaving and they aren't informing us, then we can cancel those rooms, and that's what we do. And then the other thing that I suppose is worth pointing out is that as we move into using this TA procurement framework, that has provision within it as part of the contract that providers do have to kind of ensure. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what the wording is, but they have to feedback information regularly to us about people who aren't using their rooms. So I don't think that's a major factor. The factors, as I've already explained, are the things that really drive in it, and in particular some people are only in the hotels for say 2, 3, 4 weeks, and to make a housing benefit claim in general needs accommodation can often take that long, with the form going in, evidence being collected. So by the time we're collecting information, they've already left, and then they have very little incentive to want to then go back and provide information to us to allow for a successful claim.
Could I ask a question? I'm now thinking from the council's finance side and wearing a budget hat. The two items, the failure to collect the housing benefit and the arrears on rentals, they sound somehow persistent. They don't seem one-off, because you've given valid reasons, I believe, about why it's hard to chase all this up. Are these actually allowed for as a separate line? Maybe this is for Nigel in our budget forecasts.
Yeah, in terms of, I mean, the simple answer is yes, basically. I mean, we have a what we call net cost of benefits. So in reality, you should be claiming 100% subsidy on most of this benefit expenditure. But what happens on the ground is some we can't claim back, mainly for the reasons that Richard has said, but for other reasons as well. Where there are local authority errors, there are different rules. So we have a net cost of benefits, which is held in the budget. And it's sufficient to say that net cost is escalating basically for this financial year and also for next financial year in view of the significant numbers of homeless people that are placed in accommodation. In terms of the rent arrears within the HRA, basically there is a provision for bad debts basically that we make, and should we get to a position where we need to write some of that off, basically there is a provision to cover that actually. But yes, is a simple answer.
And these are in line with the kind of figures that Richard's been mentioning.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. I mean, it is the net cost of benefits is probably approaching 2 million in the budget, in the general fund budget.
It's not small, okay, but it doesn't sound as if there's very much that can be done within the constraints of individuals in the system. Anyhow, thank you for that. I just had one other question. And then come back to Ros. These all apparently have a due date of the end of June for report back on the implementation of the recommendations. Is that still a realistic deadline? Both it's for you, Richard.
I don't know if it's me or Yasmin. As in, I think with the majority of, I'm trying to remember all of them, but the majority of them have largely already been implemented. But I don't know in terms of is that unusual or not. That might be more of a question for Yasmin.
Yasmin?
Chair, we usually, for medium recommendations, we usually do give 3 months for implementation. So I think that's a fair amount. But again, when we come to June, we can see where we are in terms of progress. And as part of the next audit committee, in the next month or so, we're going to start following up on June recommendations anyway. So if there's any sort of concerns, we can raise them to Nigel. So yeah, we hope for come June time. I think it's a realistic timeline to get most of these recommendations done. We have spoke to all the officers before we agreed those implementation dates. So yeah, I'm hoping to report back that most of them are completed come June time. We're part of the July Audit and Governance Committee.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? Alex, you have.
Thank you. Yeah, just picking up on that point around sort of the amount of recovery we're sort of seeing. So thinking particularly around that housing benefit issue, I guess I can completely understand the structural reasons why, given the way the legal duty operates and the information we would need, that arises. I just wonder if there's any information about how comparable that is to other authorities in terms of the amount we're recovering.
This is for you, I think, Yasmin. Do you have an indication?
Thanks, Chair. Not at this minute. If I can go away with that, I can see whether we can find any sort of comparatives with similar sized councils and come back to you on that. We do have a suite of other councils that we work with. And then if we have done homelessness prevention reviews there, we're likely to cover the same type of risks. And I can have a look at what the rates are there and come back to you as part of the next committee, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. And presumably you would take account of the pressures of homelessness in different authority areas, because that must be important, yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any more questions, or may we?
Sorry, for clarification, Nigel, you mentioned a 2 million debt. Was that in the housing revenue account?
No, that's a £2 million net cost of benefits.
Oh, the net
so
cost of benefits.
The difference between our expenditure, the subsidy we get from the government, and also what we reclaim back through overpaid housing benefits. Right. The net cost of the council is around 2 million. You probably might recall the conversations I've been raising around supported accommodation as well, which features highly within those figures, and that is a major problem to the city, one which we've lobbied on to the government, and I think there's a consultation out basically that we all responded to as well.
Oh, that's good to hear. I guess that's another sort of benchmarking question as well. I mean, how do we compare with other councils with that sort of figure of costs? As the chair has said, it's a substantial amount of money.
Yeah, I think possibly if Yasmin undertakes audits within other areas, then she could ask that question of the net cost of benefits. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jasmine.
Thank you.
Very much. Well, I think I don't see any more hands raised, so maybe thank you on that particular report. And may we now move on. The next one is, I think it's right, we're now moving to data protection. Is that correct?
Sorry, Chair, it's a fire risk assessments report.
Okay.
So Josie's been waiting patiently to go through that.
So this is Josie, is it?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, yes.
Please proceed.
Okay, thank you so much. Part of the reason I'm here is I am a NEBOSH qualified health and safety inspector, so I supported on this piece of work. What you will see within the report is that we were engaged to review 6 contractors that performed fire risk assessments for the council. This was following a change of contractor at request of management. What we identified within our work is that there were areas for improvement in regards to the onboarding of some of those fire risk assessors, particularly regarding the due diligence as to the level of competency under the legislation. Although it does not require specific qualifications to be a fire risk assessor, it does require that you are qualified, and it requires that you are competent, and a way of doing that is to evidence certification and so forth. And there are a number of which in place across the UK, such as the UCAS accreditation process. So we went through a process of analysing the contractors and the subcontracting that took place to assess the level of competency. And with across the 6 that were engaged, we identified 1 where there was not sufficient evidence of that competency, and also that a responsible individual had not signed off and reviewed the reports. This is a requirement of the legislation that you have someone perform the fire assessments and then someone that of sufficient competence independently review. Separate to that, although I would note that we didn't find any issues with the quality of the fire risk assessments, so we did go out and re-perform them across a number of sites, making sure that we had coverage across all 6 contractors, and we found no issues with them or any pervasive issues with the quality. Separate to that, the legislation has recently changed under the new fire safety legislation, which requires that for higher risk buildings, so those that have been identified as having fire issues, or for example, high risk high rise blocks and so forth, there is a requirement to do what's called a type 3 assessment. A type 3 assessment includes exterior building. A type 1 assessment is basically your interior walls and inwards. At the moment, all the fire risk assessments that have been performed are type 1s. So management is kind of reviewing and putting a plan in place to, as appropriate, extend certain fire risk assessments to form type 3 risk assessments. Happy to take any questions on the report. I appreciate some of the areas are quite technical, so I can also expand on any areas as people would like me to.
Thank you very much. May I first invite Tony Henderson, who's on the line, to respond, because I think I'm right in saying in the papers we got, we don't see any, we can see a deadline which has already just passed for implementation. Is that correct? Have you actually already implemented these recommendations?
Yes, we have. Hello. Just to say, I have joined Oxfordshire City Council 7 weeks ago. And in that time of joining, I have already brought on board 3 qualified fire risk assessors, whom within the new fire safety team for Oxford City Council have already started looking through all of our fire risk assessments that were completed back in 2024, assessing what those different companies reports look like, whether they are of quality, and we have already started to assess which ones we are going to move forward and do a review on and make sure that they are of the quality that we're expecting from a fire risk assessment for any of the particular buildings. The one thing I'd like to point out is that there isn't a risk profiling that has taken place across the whole portfolio, of which we are going to be doing whilst we're assessing and looking at all of these previous fire risk assessments. So we have, just to put that all into some sort of context, we have 3 fire risk assessors who have all been given either east, central or west of the city. We've split the map of the city and our portfolio in 3. Every one of those fire risk assessors will take their own portfolio, for instance, the whole of the east, and with that they will go and reassess every single one of those fire risk assessments that have taken place within their area, portfolio area, and they will be reporting back whether they need to then move forward into a type 3 based on risk profiling every single one of those properties. So that has already started, and we have already started that process.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask, out of interest, you've got your 3 fire risk assessors.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a finite task, which I know you've got a big estate, but is this a permanent labour force, or will it be until you complete all the risk assessments, then presumably you don't need it at that level? Is that correct?
What the intention is that we will take them on and keep them. So we will continue to have our own in-house fire risk assessments taking place, which in itself will save financially a cost to Oxford City Council by having 3 full-time fire risk assessors working through the whole portfolio. And that will stop what has been identified by Yasmin and Josie, that we have all these different contractors that will bring in lots of anomalies to the table and confusion, and certainly what we're trying to bring to Oxford City Council through each of these fire risk assessors having their own slice of the city and having their own estate portfolio to look after, that they will become subject matter experts in each of those buildings underneath those areas that sit beneath them. So the answer to your question is we are continuing to hoping to continue to keep them as full-time employees to cover all of the fire risk assessments and all the fire investigations or anything that covers around fire throughout the whole of Oxford City Council portfolio.
Thank you very much. That was very clear. For Ros Smith.
Thank you. Just a comment, I think, if I could, Chair. Thank you to Yasmin for the report on it and identifying this weakness with regard to fire risk assessments for the city and our buildings and portfolio. And absolutely congratulations and welcome to Oxford City Council. It's difficult for me to see you actually on the screen. Sorry, I can see what I can see you now, right? Okay, but it's not easy. I have to say. Sorry. And I hope that we meet in person at some point.
Yes,
yeah, but thank you. Absolutely great. It's an example of grow your own. To actually save the council money. Actually, Nigel nodding. Yeah, yeah, much better. I mean, I always worry about contractors and then subcontracting, and that's actually mentioned in your report, Yasmin, particularly with something like safety, fire safety and things. So thank you for that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Simon, you have a question.
Just to check that we no longer need to worry about this company, Bright Heat, because I was wondering whether Yasmin and Josie were satisfied with the response that if Bright Heat being found lacking in any of these areas, we might remove them. And they seem to be saying they had been found lacking. So we're no longer using any of those 6 companies. We're just doing it in-house.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So I'm going to suggest for this agenda item 4, We thank you and note the reports and note also the response of the various officers. And we will undoubtedly have follow-ups on recommendations in future meetings. So let's proceed now to the agenda item 5, the data protection report. And I believe, Alex Russell, are you going to be presenting, if you like, on behalf of Yasmin and your team?
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Please introduce it, if you may.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. So this report looked at 4 particular areas concerning how the Council are complying with UK GDPR. First of all, consisting of the policies and procedures to ensure compliance. It also looked at whether roles and responsibilities of key staff members were understood and adequately defined, in addition to the training requirements that the Council have in place to ensure GDPR compliance. We also looked at how the Council ensures that they can have a record of processing activities, or ROPA, in place to make sure that they capture appropriate information with regards to data processing activities. In addition to whether there were defined retention schedules in place and whether the Council had defined lawful basis for collecting, processing, retaining and sharing information. And we also looked at how the Council responded to and complied with subject rights requests, data breach responses, and in addition to that, how they performed privacy impact assessments and data sharing with third parties. As Yasmin may have noted beforehand, this came out as a limited in design and a moderate in control effectiveness, and I'll just run through some of the key findings, if I may. So the first area, which was a high finding, was in regards to how the Council's record of processing activities was designed. We noticed that there were key gaps with the ROPA, particularly around how it set out the differentiation between processing activities that were being processed under Article 6 and processing of activities under Article 9, which covers special category data, which requires an additional reason for processing. In addition to that, there were other various bits of information that were found to be missing, although, as I say in the report, it should be noted that that was down to the information governance team relying on other service areas and departments, informing them of what processing activities the Council were undertaking. In addition to that, another area we found a finding with was in regards to retention schedules, which we highlighted as a medium risk, which we found that the retention schedules hadn't been reviewed since July 2021, despite a requirement that this be reviewed in July 2022. Even though it is theoretically being applied in practice, it's still important that they're updated quite on a regular basis. Another area we found an issue with was in regards to the Council's compliance with data protection training. So there were 2 training modules we found were currently in place for the Council to ensure that there was compliance with data protection legislation. The compliance statistics at the time of our review were found to be for 57.5% for one of them, and for the other one it was found to be 54%. But again, we did note that the Council are currently in the process of moving over to a newer HR system to ensure that there's better monitoring and compliance with their training requirements. Another area we found a finding with was in regards to third-party data sharing arrangements, which we had a look at the current data sharing arrangements that the Council have in place, and we found that only 42 of the 114 entries within the data sharing log that we looked at were showing as having a equivocal data sharing agreement, and of the 42 we found that there are about 17 that were unsigned and 9 were found to be in draft, with the remaining 6 either in the approval stage or being drafted. And in addition to that, there was one other finding around the data privacy impact assessments, of which we found the 27 that were recorded. There were gaps that were, I believe there were around 13 or so, there were around 14 that didn't show whether or not they'd been signed off or completed, which we rated as a low risk finding. Thank you very much for that, and I'm happy to sort of take any questions.
If I may, I think it's probably good first to hear. Welcome to you, Emma. Would you like to respond to these criticisms?
Thank you, Councillor Fry. So the team have been doing its own internal audits of the individual service areas within the council in terms of how they coordinate their data protection prior to this audit taking place. So a number of the actions had already been picked up and steps were already in place, being put in train to deal with them. And the outcome of those internal audits will be reported to CMT to ensure that the organisation is sort of dealing with some of the problems in terms of, application of data retention schedules, review of their data retention schedules, etc. In terms of a few of the things as to why, so for example, with review of those, why it's not taking place in a timely manner, the team's quite small. So in terms of data protection, we only have one dedicated officer on data protection for the entirety of the council. As you can appreciate, therefore, that there's limited scope what we can achieve as a centralised department. So there is a lot of reliance on service areas to be educated and manage it within their own service areas. As a result, we've sort of reported back to CLT on this. It's been understood by CLT. And they understand that there will be sort of corporate actions coming, which aren't necessarily ones from my team, but are ones for every department as a whole. The team had, as you will be aware, the ICO notice on freedom of information performance, and over 2022-23 there was a lot of focus on that. Now that we're performing beyond satisfactory in terms of our freedom of information performance, we've turned our eye to data protection. So it always was something that we knew needed the attention, but until we sort of dealt with the ICO matter, we had limited capacity to be able to dedicate it. So I'm really have a positive outlook in terms of addressing the concerns within the report. I'm pleased that though they are of concern, that they are of more of a, should we say, administrative nature rather than as finding, for example, that we failed to respond to data subject access requests in a timely manner, etc. So it really gives us sort of some teeth to get into in terms of corporately, but also it's good to see that my team is sort of doing what they need to do in terms of their day-to-day job in relation to dealing with data subject access requests and data protection, and hopefully we can get these things implemented corporately as we move forward.
Thank you very much. Judith, do you have a question?
I just have a question about item 1, record of processing activities, and it's around the concept of consent and anonymisation of data. And I just wondered what the council does about getting consent to use individuals' data, or is the data anonymised according to the ICO and the Data Protection Act?
Is this for you, Emma?
So it depends. It depends on what information has been collected by which department and for what purpose. So if we take, for example, one of Nigel's departments, Laura Basil's department, they handle an enormous amount of personal data, as you might expect in relation to council tax reduction scheme, etc. And it is the information that we collect is properly managed. It's not something that we allow other departments to dip into. It's not something that we share with other teams in order to allow them to cross-reference against their sources. So we're very, very good at ensuring that data that we hold in the council for one purpose is not used in other teams for other purposes. We also, because there's been a refresh of the website and that's still undergoing, we're having a refresh of through the internal audit work that's been done with my team. We've looked at data protection notices, etc., and the consent that we might be asking people to acknowledge or agree to make sure they're all up to standard and in line with best practice. So it's something that we're absolutely very good at, and we do ensure that data is only used for the purposes it's collected and retained as long as it's needed to, and no longer than necessary. Hopefully that answers the question.
And anonymisation of data, do you do that at any point, or is that not necessary?
So for example, let's just say a department needs to report on something to cabinet, then it would report in an anonymised way. It wouldn't use data that would allow for an individual to be identified. But where we have to report to, say, government, and that there's duties to provide that information in a certain format with a certain amount of detail, then obviously it's not anonymised. So it depends what it's been used for, but where it needs to be provided and we can and it should be anonymised, it is anonymised.
Not seeing other hands. I just have one question. This is about the final paragraph of the management response, which refers to the pressures arising from freedom of information requests. I have a feeling, and maybe Nigel or Bill will corroborate this, I think in the budget we did have a position of someone to help with freedom of information requests. Is that correct? I know it was raised in the context of budget discussion, but what you seem to be describing, Emma, is a lot of pressure on data protection, which is magnified by freedom of information requests. Do you have adequate resources?
We have had issues recently just in terms of staff availability, etc., as you always do when you're managing a service area. You know, people are off work unexpectedly, etc. So recently, and in terms of certainly acting as quickly as we would have liked off the back of these recommendations, we've had some issues. When we're fully up to staff, we manage. I am looking at the overall service area and seeing how we might bring some more capacity into that team. I think it's we've still had some time bedding in following the work with the ICO that we were doing, and now we're sort of getting back to business as normal on the information governance. Unfortunately, what we've seen is a spike in FOIs and other information requests. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is we're still trying to find our feet and find out what the status quo is, but unfortunately, because we're seeing an increase in information requests, it's hard to give a definitive opinion on whether we've got sufficient capacity at the moment. What I would say is at times it's exceptionally busy, and I've pulled other members of my wider team in, and that does help. But it's something we're going to have to keep under review as we sort of go through this year in terms of the outcomes of this audit, implementing the outcomes of this audit report, but also looking at what happens in terms of trends on information governance and also data subject access requests, which we have seen an increase of.
Thank you. Ros.
Thank you, Emma. In the management response, you mentioned that there's a plan to review all the audits holistically and report them along with the themes and trends to the senior leadership team for consideration, along with some proposals on how to proceed to address their concerns and moving forward. It mentions that work's underway and is going to report's going to CMT in March 2025. Has that gone to the CMT?
No, it hasn't. Unfortunately, I've been off work for a couple of weeks, and then we've had some absences within the team. So we took this report to CLT. So we've had the initial discussions at a higher level. Unfortunately, Grace, who manages information governance, wasn't able to be here tonight for personal reasons. So I'm due to pick up with her and sort of look at how we bring that forward to CLT. But the timelines have slightly slipped, unfortunately, just due to staff absences.
Right, sorry, can I just follow that up? Yes. So I'm sorry to hear that, unless it's not good, and I hope you're all feeling better now. Seems to be a lot going around again, don't there? So it mentions in this response that you're seeking to get corporate agreement to the implementation of new processes and procedures to support the strengthening of these reports all across the council departments. I mean, that's quite a big undertaking, let's put it that way. So when is that likely to go to the senior management team? Are you thinking of possibly June now or July?
I would hope before then. I'm hoping that we can get it through sort of before we hit the elections, really, because it's a little bit quieter for officers generally in terms of meetings. So that's sort of my indication. But unfortunately, I was only back at work on Monday, so I've yet to catch up with my team and sort of work out where we are and what needs to happen next. But I hope not as late as June, July. I'm hoping it will sort of go to the corporate leadership team before that. Just to kind of give an indication about some of these actions so that members sort of understand what I mean in terms of corporate processes. If we take, for example, data sharing agreements, they might take a number of forms. So we might have a specific data sharing agreement that's standalone and that's processed by my team and they get that signed and they get a copy of it. There might also then be a contract for another, let's say we've got a new ICT system that has information put into it and is held on the cloud. There might be data provisions in the contract around that, but not a standalone data sharing agreement. And what we need to get in place is that as departments are contracting and they have these data sharing clauses and these data protection clauses, etc., within their contracts, that those contracts are being shared with the team as well. So, because where we're missing things is where it's in a contract and a procurement that the team wouldn't ordinarily be involved in, and departments aren't thinking to flag it with the team, with the information governance team. So it's sort of looking at our corporate processes and seeing where we can slip my information governance team into part of that process, and making sure we're getting notified appropriately and that other teams are knowing that they need to notify the information governance team as well.
So who is ensuring that things don't slip between the cracks? Is this Grace's role, or?
So in terms of data protection resources, we don't have enough to have someone, fully dedicated to this with the amount of contracts with that. So what we're going to be doing is speaking with procurement, for example, making sure we're tying in with the legal team when they're executing documents. And so start at that level, but then also, when we're looking at the new training solution, we're also looking at different types of training too. So then we'll be identifying people within service areas that have certain responsibilities and then getting them to do certain training, so that we might have something more about what to do when you're entering into something that looks like or feels like or operates as a data sharing agreement. So there's kind of different routes into it, and we're hoping that if we can use each different route, then there's less chance it'll slip through the gaps. So there'll always be someone in the process that if someone before them has missed it, someone later in the process might pick it up. Does that make sense?
Thank you very much. I don't see any more hands raised. I mean, it sounds to me as if it's complicated, and I imagine in follow-up of recommendations, which I think we come on to now, I mean, this will appear in future follow-up reports.
Yeah.
So thank you both. Oh, sorry, yes, go on, Ros.
Just wondering, Emma, if it might be useful for the committee to see sort of like a flow chart as to how those decisions are taken, as to what point, what is recorded and what is shared, and how that's done. So basically looking closer at the processes.
Yeah, whether it's a flow chart or not, but I think out of the work that we're doing for CRT, we should be able to get something to committee on the next update that perhaps shows some of the things that we're looking to do and how it'll slot in. Whether it'll be a flow chart or whether it'll be sort of displayed differently, but yeah, we certainly should be able to provide something with an update report that shows what it is that we're proposing and how it works.
Yeah, so something simple that we can understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, many thanks to Alex and Yasmin on this, and to you, Emma, as well. So thank you. We note the report as we are invited to. And then let's proceed to agenda item 6, the follow-up report, which will be introduced by you, Yasmin. Is that right?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. I'll take the report as read. I can go through some of just a summary of the recommendations due from recommendations that were issued in 23-24. So 4 medium recommendations for recruitment and retention. They're still in progress, and we'll continue to follow these up ahead of the next Audit and Governance Committee. We have 1 high recommendation for data analytics. That is still in progress, and I believe we follow it up in each follow-up round as well. This was around the purchase card transactions being monitored and being approved and reviewed regularly. We'll continue to monitor this recommendation until it's fully embedded within the council processes, but good progress has been made against that. There's also a medium recommendation completed within data analytics, and it continues to be implemented as well as we go along. 1 high and 2 medium recommendations for income generation and building control respectively. They're currently on the 3rd revised due date, but aren't due for implementation until June 25. So that will be followed up as part of the reported back as part of the July Audit and Governance Committee. So that's for 23-24 recommendations. Ones for 24-25, there were 3 medium recommendations for accounts payable. They're currently in progress, and they've been given a revised due date for April 25, so the end of April 25. Again, we'll report it as part of the July committee. And then 4 medium recommendations for risk management. and 1 high and 3 medium recommendations for data protection. They're currently not due yet, and when they do fall due, we'll follow those up. And if you see kind of the table on page 85, we'll continue just adding reviews on this. So the homelessness prevention review, the data protection one is already on there, the fire risk assessments, and this will continue to follow these up as soon as they're due. I'll pause there for any questions.
Well, may I first invite, I think Phil McGaskill is on the line, and he's, I think, the best place to answer on the data analytics recommendation and follow up. Phil, would you like to respond? And in particular, do you think you're still able to meet the 30th of April due date?
Good evening, councillors and colleagues. Good evening, Yasmin. I have got some good news to report from my point of view. Yesterday, we were able to fix the issue with our reporting module that was preventing us from reporting our KPIs. So from the new year, from the 1st of April, I will be able to report monthly on the control figures, and that will remove one of our recommendations, Yasmin. So I will run that by you before we meet and get your seal of approval, if that's okay. On the second front, which was the control of council spending by credit cards, that is proving to be a little more tricky, Yasmin, and councillors. We have got a new process in place, and we are asking our approvers to adhere to that moving forward. But we still have a number of credit card payments that are yet to be approved. And my team are working through those weekly and helping our colleagues to A, set up new approvers, B, be in touch with the bank to find their new PIN numbers. There's a variety of reasons why they haven't been approved. We've also found a number of approvers have left the organisation. So that list continues to shrink every week. We are on it every week. We're solving those problems. But I expect we won't be able to finish with that final recommendation probably until the meeting in May by the looks of it at the moment. But I would say there's a 50% reduction in the outstanding approvals that have been required since our last meeting. I think it was January. That concludes my report, councillors.
Thank you very much. How on earth do you deal with people not knowing their PIN numbers?
Oh, councillor, it's very interesting. We've been working on this for quite some time. What tends to happen is there are a group of people who use the credit card regularly, and quite often in their cases, their approvers may change, and so we end up with a backlog of things that need approving. People leave the organisation. And then we have another group of people, although they're issued with a credit card, they might use that maybe 3 or 4 times in a year, and they're the people that tend to forget their PIN numbers. But during our tracing to WebBat, we found that some people have cut their cards up because they didn't feel they need them. We'd had other people who got PIN sentries and the batteries had gone flat. There was a whole array of reasons that were explained to us why people couldn't move forward. But we've isolated each of those reasons and we are working through them at quite a comfortable rate at the moment. So I have a new plan, which I will run by Yasmin once we are in position. And that would involve making approvers responsible to check the payments are made each month, maybe including the process in part of the appraisal. There's quite a few recommendations that I'd like to run by Yasmin, but I'd like to get us into a position where we're up to date first before we proceed.
Thank you, Phil. Are there any other questions from committee? From Ros, yes.
Comment, with people cutting up their cards, and the ability to order a new one, I mean, I don't know what the process is. That is sort of possibly opening us up for a risk of fraud, isn't it?
What tends to happen, what we've identified with the people who've cut up their cards, Councillor, is they don't feel that they needed a new one. So when the expiry date had arrived on that card, they cut the card off and didn't communicate that to the people who manage the card at our end. So those people expected there would be a renewal, and the renewal hasn't taken place. So it's that lack of understanding, really, of the people who hold the cards, and that's where we need to do some more work about where their responsibility sits.
Forgive me if I'm being a little dunce here, but this is probably a question to Yasmin. Is there a concern about fraud happening with this sort of system at the process that we have at the moment?
Thanks, Councillor. It's not so much of the case of fraud happening. I guess, coming to think of it, if individuals are spending the credit cards incorrectly, so against certain merchant codes that they're not supposed to, then it's against council policy, isn't it? So would that classify as fraudulent if it's going against council policy? Possibly yes. But when we came to review the purchase card transactions and we compared them to merchant codes, it wasn't the case that they were using the cards inappropriately. It's more a case of they're not being reviewed and approved on a regular basis, and expenditure isn't being verified by the approver that's set on the system. So there is susceptibility to fraud if transactions aren't being reviewed accordingly, and if it's not in line with council policies. So there can be, there is possibility of fraud that can happen. But in terms of how likely it is, we didn't identify anything as part of our testing to say there's any sort of fraudulent activity going on.
Phil, you have your hand up.
Yes, Councillor. I've reviewed the outstanding expenditure that we have from the Barclay card payments. I've been through there, and I have spoken to the managers that are concerned in those areas and talked about the payments that have been made. And I concur with Yasmin. There is nothing on the list that appears to me to be suspicious. It's rather a case of the approving process is where we're failing on making sure that a senior manager is signing off really on that expenditure and keeping control of the process rather than we have a concern about what is being purchased with the cards.
Thank you. I'm seeing a nod from Ros, so she is reassured, I hope. Any other comments, questions? If not, again, thanks very much for this report, and we note it, and that's all we're actually asked to do at this stage. So thank you very much, and thank you, Phil. Let's now go on to the annual plan and strategic plan. Again, I assume it's you, Yasmin.
It is indeed, Chair. Thank you. So we have the 25-26 internal audit draft plan. This is for audit and governance approval today. Our audit programme, it's set out on pages 9 to 13 of the plan and pages 105 to 109 of your packs. As part of our planning process, we met with the operational delivery group, which consists of all heads of services within the council, and also Nigel to go through the initial plan. We got feedback, made any sort of amendments that were needed on the plan. And then we also took the plan through to the council's trading company representatives as well, for both ODS and Ox Place. We wanted to understand where we could provide more collaborative working and added value from joint input from the council and its companies. And that's why we took a slightly different approach this year. We have identified a thematic review, which we will use days from both the council and the ODS plan and focus on common themes affecting both the council and the companies. And that will avoid us from duplicating any sort of work across the separate audit plans as well and take a much more coordinated approach. We have also assessed where there's overlaps between council and ODS audit plans, and we've included a roles and responsibilities document. This outlines reviews from the Council Internal Audit Plan that will require ODS involvement. It's mainly around data analytics and maybe some of the cyber work as well. And that's included as part of Appendix 1, which you can have a look at. And as always, we keep the programme under review during the year, and we'll introduce to the plan any sort of significant areas of risk identified by management in the year, and we're flexible in changing the plan where needed. I also wanted to touch on the opinion structure. So previously we provided an individual head of internal audit opinion for the council only. There was no formal head of internal audit opinions issued for ODS or Oxplace, but for 25-26 this is going to change slightly. So we'll issue a separate opinion to the council, and we'll also issue a group-wide head of internal audit opinion, which covers both the council and ODS. And then for the first time, ODS will also have a separate head of internal audit opinion. This will be done by a separate BDO team, and it will go to the ODS committee as well, and it'll be reflected in the group head of internal audit opinion, which the committee will receive. Oxplace, we won't be issuing a head of internal audit opinion just due to the number of limited reviews being undertaken, and there just isn't sufficient coverage to support on an opinion on this, so that will remain as it is. I'll pause for any comments and questions, and I'm happy to answer on any reviews that you might have questions on within the plan as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ros, you...
Sorry, for clarification, Yasmin, did I hear you say that there will be a joint internal audit with ODS?
Yes, there will be, Councillor Smith. Yeah.
I thought they had to be separate and there was a Chinese wall between the two.
Yeah, this year, Nigel, you may want to come in as well. We decided with Nigel and Simon as part of ODS that there should be some type of collaborative working that both the council and companies can take advantage of. We are still going to be part of separate teams doing the thematic review that we've identified, but it would saving us from duplicating any sort of work within the plan. We decided to do a more collaboration approach this year. Nigel, I'm not sure whether you wanted to come in on that as well.
Yes, he will respond.
Yeah, exactly what Yasmin says, actually. There are benefits from having the same auditors for all parts of the group, basically. And certainly when you're doing end-to-end processes, it makes sense to follow that process all the way through. So we did some work this year around payments through QL, basically, which went from ODS in terms of the jobbing works, etc., straight through to the council who actually make the payments through its payment system sort of thing. So it's that sort of joint work I'm referring to. In addition to that, we are looking this year for some work around governance, basically, again, which transgresses our companies, basically. So it makes sense for efficiencies, and it makes sense because they have the same auditors, basically.
Yeah. Sorry, and I was reassured some years back when I first joined this committee that they were separate entities. There were a Chinese wall at the middle. But I do worry about that.
Yeah,
I don't know how that fits with SIPFA.
Well, just to explain, that they're the same internal auditors, there are different external auditors.
Okay.
So the company external auditors are Mazars, right. The City Council and the group's external auditors are EY, basically. Yeah, EY. Okay. So there's a separation there, basically. So okay. Yeah.
Right. And SIPFA are happy with that joint or internal audit on between the two.
Summarise the question, please. Yeah.
Well, in terms of summarising, I'm happy from an accounting viewpoint that's fine, basically. The auditors are happy with that arrangement, basically. So yeah, I don't have a problem, basically.
I have, if I may, just two questions, which are more on the strategic plan, which is maybe jumping ahead. I mean, it's in the same report. One, which is, I guess, a matter of opinion. I mean, recruitment and retention is always an issue for the council. I don't think it's got any less. Now, it's down to be addressed in 26-27 currently. I just wondered, but it's just my view, I mean, treasury management is down in 25-26, and I know that's important too. I just wondered whether there couldn't be some shifting forward of recruitment and retention, but I can't remember when we last discussed it. I don't think it was very long ago.
Yep,
You may
Chair.
remember.
Yeah, the last time we looked at recruitment and retention was in 23-24. I guess we're in a position where we're still following up on recommendations that we made in 23-24, and it might be too early to do a review in 25-26, hence putting it for 26-27 to give them a bit of a breather before we go in and look at the processes again or various areas that they've improved on.
That's a very good answer. Thanks for that. I mean,
Thanks,
I can't fault that. The other one is a kind of more global one. We know global government reorganization is going to be coming along. Is there any sense in which we should somehow be trying to, because it won't happen, I assume, instantaneously, but it's going to have all kinds of implications for this council and legacy councils and companies, you name it. Is there any way in which that could somehow be factored into the work programme when we get an inkling of what's proposed and consider what it means for this entity?
Of course, Chair. As I mentioned earlier, the programme is under constant review. So if there are any sort of emerging risks, as you said around devolution, that are to come to us, and there's more guidance available, we're happy to make any sort of changes that we need to. We'll consult that with Nigel, and then we'll update the plan accordingly with that. That's not a problem from our side.
Yeah, I suppose just to say that the direction basically won't really be known until the back end of November, sort of thing. That's what we understand to be the current timetable. I think that might be a little bit too late in the day, basically, to start making changes to the plans, which some of these audits will have already taken place, basically. So I take your point, and Yasmin's right. We can look to sort of adapt as we go along, but that might be a bit late in the day, basically.
They're fully understood, but there is this black swans flying somewhere in this. Okay. Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands raised, so I'm again going to suggest the committee, having discussed, we note the report, and many thanks, Yasmin.
Thanks, Chair.
You're free to log off, but you probably want to hear the last item, which, well, we have the minutes, but the final substantive item is Andrew Britton, who's been waiting a long time to present a very important item, the council and group audit reports for the 23-24 year. Would you like briefly to introduce it, Andrew?
Of course, thank you, Chair. And I'm hoping my connection stayed. I appear to have just got kicked out, so I've managed to rejoin. So let me explain the report that you've got. So the report is the auditor's annual report, and the recommendation is the committee notes this report. We'll take it as read, but this is just to explain. This is the public-facing document which is required under the NAO Audit Code. It summarises the results of the audit work for the 23-24 year end and previously, and therefore summarises the items that would have been previously shared with you as part of our audit results report. A couple of things just to point out. Firstly, it confirms I signed the audit opinion ahead of the backstop date, which the government legislation instituted, which was at the end of February. And secondly, it additionally contains our value for money commentary, which explains the arrangements that we reviewed, the findings that we identified, and collectively those led us to an unqualified value for money conclusion that was part of the audit opinion. So on that basis, Chair, happy to take any questions that any members may have.
Any questions I have? I don't think these are major ones. I have two or three. One is right near the beginning in the paper pack, page 128. You state that there was a delay caused by delays in Oxford City Council data. I'm just trying to find the actual wording. But I just wonder, maybe I should ask Bill, who's still on the call, Bill, is that how you understand things? It seems that delays from this end were being blamed in part for the time to complete these accounts.
Bill, do you want me to just give the context first and then you can comment? Would that be helpful?
Yes, please, because I'm trying to find.
That's all right, don't worry. So as we said, or as I said in my introduction, there was a backstop date existed at the end of February. As a reminder, there was a previous backstop date on the 13th of December, which resulted in the disclaimed opinions for 21, 22 and 22, 23. So collectively, us and Bill and the team had to move onto 23, 24, and although we'd started that in advance of the December backdate for the others, clearly there was a time pressure to get everything done before the February backstop. So there were certain areas, and those are listed in the report on the page, Chair, that you refer to on 128, relation to investment properties, PPE, for example, where the volume of information that we needed from an audit evidence perspective, we took the decision rather than not be able to provide an audit opinion by the backstop date of 28th of February, we would limit our procedures in those particular areas and report out as such. So you'll see that in the audit opinion itself, where we state we were disclaiming our audit opinion because of the comparatives and the opening balances and the information that was a knock-on impact of the 22-23 disclaimed audit opinion, which is what I explained to you in the January committee. But that whilst we had completed a large proportion of our work in relation to those areas listed, we weren't able to finalise, and so therefore we pointed that out in our audit report. Bill, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think sort of the delays in receiving audit evidence kind of is, I suppose it's audit speak really, but there were a lot of samples that were selected. So some of this is down to the amount of information that's required, capacity, and kind of digging out some of the kind of source data out of archives, in some cases in property. So it's not that people were kind of sitting on their hands. It's because all of, I think, kind of to put in context for both this and also the year which we're currently closing. There's a lot of audit work needed in order to rebuild assurance. So there's a lot of kind of capacity pressures, both on ourselves and also the auditors, to get through the amount of data that's needed. So I think that's kind of putting it in context a little bit more, if that helps.
Thank you very much. I mean, it does make sense. Thank you for that. Another one, this is turning to financial sustainability. This is in our pack, page 147. It's the largest risk affecting the council throughout 23-24 was the ratio of council tax income as a proportion of net expenditure, where for Oxford, this was towards the bottom, but not at the bottom of the range for other local authorities. I'm not sure whether this is, I mean, you describe it as the largest risk, so you're presumably implying that the risk related to things like the Oxford model, the companies owned by the council, was larger than for most other councils. But equally, I suppose it might be argued that given the growing demand for services, such as we've heard, like temporary accommodation, all the rest, if we didn't have these extra sources of income and relied solely on council tax, that it might be even worse. I mean, I'm just, I guess, quibbling with this notion that this is the largest risk. Is that the common view among auditors, that this is a risk if you don't rely overwhelmingly on council tax?
So this is in the context of financial sustainability. Obviously, there may be other risks that the council are facing, which are relative, and obviously you've spent a lot of time looking at your risk register, and there are other focuses as well as financial sustainability. It's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? In terms of if you find yourself in a position where your council tax take is relatively low to your expenditure requirements, then there is the need to identify other sources of income, which is as you say, not uncommon, but equally that gap is of varying sizes. So it was simply a fact that where you see those percentages quoted relative to other councils, there is a bigger gap to address. Now, clearly, the alternative, as you say, the Oxford model that we quote there, and the alternative approach allows the council to close that gap. However, it does have in terms of sources of income, it has potentially more volatility. And so I guess it depends on whether you see risk as an opportunity or a positive or a negative in that regard. So I think that's the point that we were trying to make there. I'm sure Nigel would probably want to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think in the report, the report is picking up the SIPFA resilience ratios, basically, which they publish on an annual basis, and it was those ratios that is suggesting that the council is low risk. And I think I would agree with Andrew and those members that would read the Section 25 report that I take to council each year would know my comments, basically, that the Oxford model is a risky strategy. It's not saying it's wrong, basically, it's a risky strategy. And it's a different strategy from other local authorities that would potentially have to cut or reduce services, whereas we're relying on more and more income streams, basically, to keep our services going. So inherently, it's a risky strategy. I think Andrew's sort of just saying that, and I would agree with him, basically, in this respect.
But it keeps it's not keeping the trains running, but it's keeping services running in the meantime. Yes, I know, it's a balance. Okay. One last question, and this is really for Bill. When we look at the audit differences which come up in the executive summary on page 167, I look at the sums. Elsewhere, you have a table that shows how they're derived. I've been folding over corners. I can't remember where I found that. But the point is, when I look in the scheme of things, these are not to me, very big numbers. These are group materiality, 220,000, council materiality, 190,000. I mean, I don't think those are big differences. I mean, maybe Bill will comment, have I got the wrong end of the stick? This is net of a whole lot of other numbers which are explained elsewhere. But Bill?
No, I don't think there were, in the scheme of things, a lot of difference. So I don't think you have misinterpreted it. I don't know whether Andrew wants to make any comments on that kind of in comparison to others, but overall, I would say no, compared to the size of, for instance, our assets portfolio, etc. No, the numbers are small.
Yeah, so I get two things. The numbers you're quoting there, Chair, are the audit difference threshold, which is above which we would report differences to you. So anything below that we would consider to be trivial and sort of not worth bothering you with. In terms of the reporting that we've got there, I would agree with Bill. There wasn't anything. I mean, the only thing that actually of the numbers that are listed there was one reclassification, which ran into sort of the millions, the 16.5 million, which was just a classification within the I&E statement. So in terms of errors, if you like, in absolute numbers, there weren't anything of significant size. And when you look at the the work that we were able to keep on property. As Bill said, you've got a very large asset base there. We've got one overstatement that we identified of 1.9 million, but other than that, there wasn't anything. That is a judgmental difference, as that report notes. So there were a number that were corrected. There were a few there that were listed as uncorrected, but I wouldn't say significant in volume or size in comparison to other audits. Equally, if we had none at all, you'd be wondering what we've been doing. So hopefully it strikes the right balance in terms of identifying that there were things that came out of the audit report of the audit work and included in the report there, but equally nothing of significance to cause concern to members.
I've found the page I should have referred to, which is 186, which actually gives you a breakdown of the 1.9 million you mentioned is due to relating to the land value of Ramsey House, which, if you don't know, is in St Ebbs. But these are all about valuations of property assets, which I suspect are not a big deal when it comes to analysing the accounts. Bill.
Yes, Chair. Well, I'd also probably ought to have added that of these unadjusted differences, there's the one factual one at the top there, then the projected differences are where there's an extrapolation. So there's a difference been identified that's then been extrapolated over the whole of the kind of sample group, rather than that being the actual figure which was found by the auditors. It's just a larger figure because it's extrapolated out. And as you say, the Ramsey House, it's a judgmental difference about how much of the valuation should be assessed as the building element and how much should be the land element. So it's kind of a matter of judgment between kind of property people and compared to lease calculations, etc. So it's a kind of technical judgmental difference.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking the top one. I can't remember what 23 to 25 George Street is. Is that Jamie's Italian?
I can't answer that one. I'll have to defer to someone with.
Is it Broad Street? Sorry, I was looking at the wrong street.
Yes, Broad Street.
There's 23. I wonder which the property is, 23 to 25. That was all. Sorry, that was just by the way. Okay, well, I think given the lateness of the hour and everything, I don't see any more hands. So I'd like to thank you very much for staying on, Andrew. And we're not asked really to make lots of recommendations. We're noting again this particular report, and thank you very much for getting the last year's audit out of the way. Then we now turn to the minutes of the last meeting in January. And I looked at them earlier. I didn't have any questions. Does anybody else have any comments, questions? Are they a correct summary of the last meeting? I take it as assent. So thanks very much. And then we're meant to note the dates of future meetings as set out in the agenda. And I have no idea who will be on the committee then. Sorry, yeah.
I do have one comment about the minutes, and that is identification of individual councillors asking questions and spitting. It really should just say the member or members. It's usually not putting down councillor names, because it could later lead to misinterpretation in the public domain. And I think we really should stick with that, as most councils do. They don't give the name of the councillor asking the question or raising a concern, because it leads to, I didn't say that, or she didn't say that, or he didn't say that. So please, can we keep it just as a member or members asked or members queried, please?
I mean, I think well, that's not really a thing for this meeting, but given that all of our meetings are literally recorded, right? That's right. I mean, you can always go back and find out the stuff anyway. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think this is something that probably needs to be raised with Emma Jackman. But I mean, given our meetings are literally recorded, I think having X asked Y is perfectly reasonable in minutes, actually.
say it has led in the past to questions raised by different members saying, I didn't say that, or I did say that. That's all I'm saying. And yes, we have the live recordings, that's true. But I'm just saying it has led in the past. That's all. Thank you.
Is your concern that it may be attributed to the wrong person, is that?
It could be.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not saying it is. I can talk to you about that. Yeah. It's general factors that it's members' names are not mentioned, but Anna is absolutely right. You know, they are allowed to stream all the recordings and such, so everybody can go back and check anyway if they so wish to do so. But
Just a brief comment that it's inconsistent across minutes from different committees. Some committees identify councillors by name, some just put councillors. So whatever option you choose, could it be consistent?
absolutely.
I
Well,
will pick that
there's
up.
Emma. Emma is just the person to answer.
We'll pick it up. Obviously, we've got a very new grouping of committee services officers who are still bedding in. I mean, we've had a wholesale change. Oh, sorry, wholesale change across the service area in the last year, and we're also kind of they're still settling into their committee. So we'll pick it up with Jonathan and we'll have a look at it and try and ensure some consistency. But be assured, it's for no other reason than obviously members of staff are still finding their way and settling into their pace. So we'll try to get a bit more consistency across the minutes.
Thank you very much, and there will be consistency in what we do, and thanks, Judith, for raising that. So with that, I still can't find it, but oh, here we are, 23rd of July. So I hope you're not all on summer holiday and that you're on the committee. There we are. So in the meantime, enjoy, what's it, a more than 3-month break. So thanks very much.
Thank you.